Greetings, my ever-wonderful jelly spoons. Welcome back to my channel. Today, as ever, we are doing a Monday Madness video where I talk about anything and everything that I fancy. And this week, what I am going to be talking to you about is this brand new book that has released in the last couple of weeks. I pre-ordered it, like many of you guys may have done several months ago now, and it finally arrived. I had a chance to sit down, managed to read the entire thing, and I have thoughts. So let's make this a sort of review video, shall we? Discussing the 9 Eyes of Lucien. Let's do it. The three things I've decided to focus on while I'm doing my review of this book is the plot, the characters, or the main characters, the ones we get to know the best, and the writing style, and then I'll give an overall review of just what I thought at the very, very end. And of course, this should go without saying, but spoiler alert! For the 9 Eyes of Lucien, for Campaign 2 of Critical Role, for any part of the story of Mollymauk, Tea Leaf, Lucien, and Kingsley. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. Alright. Here we go. So before I started scripting this video, I did a little bit of research and I tried to find out as much as I could about this book and how it came to be. And the most that I found came in the acknowledgements at the end. There are some rather obvious folks to thank for this one, namely the brilliant minds behind the achievement that is Critical Role. The creativity, humour and humanity of the cast were a constant inspiration, and I'm fortunate to be playing in their sandbox. Specifically, I want to thank Matt Mercer and Taliesin Jaffe for being so generous with their characters and for allowing me the space to get weird. This is all coming from the author, who is Madeleine Roux, the New York Times best-selling author of the Asylum series, which I have not read, so I'll take their word for it for that. And that was important for me to know before I went in, because I wanted to know, before I read it, whether this book was being treated as canon. And as far as I can tell, it is. So this is now a part of the Wikipedia. If you look up Lucien, or Molly, but mostly Lucien, the backstory that is in this book, that is included in his wiki page. And so as far as I can tell, this book is being treated as canon. Therefore, all the comments I'm going to be making about it in this video are talking about this book as if it is now woven into the canon of the lore. I'm also going to make the assumption here, because I couldn't really find out that much about it. If anyone can, please let me know down in the comments below. Basically, I am assuming that Matt Mercer and Taliesin Jaffe had at least something to do with helping to shape the plot of this story, aka I know Taliesin didn't know very much about Lucien, but Matt Mercer did, so I'm going to assume that Matt was at least consulted for some of the things that happen plot-wise in this book, and I will talk about the plot in more detail in a moment, but that is the assumptions that I am making. Number one, this book is considered officially canon, and number two, that Matt Mercer himself and Taliesin Jaffe had something to do with the plot that happened in this book. Okay then, so with all that information firmly in our brains, spoiler alert for this story and for Campaign 2 of Critical Role, let's discuss the 9 Eyes of Lucien. I feel like I'm in the wrong cosplay for this. Bear with me a moment. That is infinitely better. Alright, let's discuss the 9 Eyes of Lucien. That's me, in case you couldn't tell. We're going to start by talking about the plot. I won't give away too many spoilers, but anyone who has seen Critical Role Campaign 2 will know at least how the story ends. This story starts in Shady Creek Run, and it ends at the family home of the Clays. Very briefly. And it is good. As a plot, I like it. As I said at the beginning, in the acknowledgements, they do thank Matt Mercer and Taliesin, which again leads me to believe that this is canon, and a lot of it is based on at least something that Matt and Taliesin said about Lucien's backstory. So, plot-wise, I don't have any particular issues with it, other than I sometimes feel like some things came and went a little quickly. For example, at the beginning, we get this stuff with the hag witch in the cottage, and it feels very over and done with very, very quickly. It is a little reminiscent of D&D in a way. It's a sort of side plot that hangs around for a little while and then suddenly is over and done with and never comes back again. Although I appreciate the irony of the whole puppets thing coming back up when Lucien is acting and behaving as a puppet master of other creatures and people. And so I can see that they tried to bring it back through, and it was sort of a metaphor towards the end, but I feel like there could have been more done with that. I liked the intrigue and the surprise, and I love the darkness because I am a horror kid. I really do love that. But as a piece of plot, I just felt like it finished very, very quickly and then was sort of irrelevant for a lot of the rest of the story, which wasn't awful, just, you know, I felt like it could have had more impact than that, because it definitely deserved to. It was a really spooky piece of the plot. The time skips definitely helped it feel like it was moving quite fast. I enjoyed that bit a little bit though. I didn't want to settle in one place for too long. I liked to move on to the next thing, and because I have watched Critical Role Campaign 2, you know where it's going, so the lead up to it, you don't want to skip through it exactly, but because you know where it's going, you don't want to spend too long slogging over things that you know aren't gonna matter very much. So while Lucien's early childhood was very interesting, and I'm glad we got to hear a bit about that, I was also glad that we did, you know, power through it, as it were, and we then got to the chapters with Vesta Rogner, and, you know, Cree was in it the whole time, but we got more of Cree as we went on. I enjoyed hearing about Lucien and Cree and everyone joining the Orders, and their life there, and what it was about, and why Lucien didn't get along with it as well as the others, and why he made the big break for lack of a better word, freedom, and to go off on his own and do his own thing, and why he ended up doing the whole Nonagon thing. And the reasoning definitely sat well with me. I 100% was behind him. I knew why he was doing what he did and probably would have done the same thing. So I felt all of that and I definitely agreed. It was a very interesting part of the plot. I also definitely enjoyed Brevon's fate. Enjoyed is probably not the right word to be using about that. I enjoyed how it was written as opposed to enjoyed Brevon dying. Spoiler alert. Because Brevon was one of the characters that we were introduced to solely in this book and had not met in the Mighty Nine and had not had fleshed out and didn't have a lot of time to flesh out really in this book, I didn't really care that they died. I cared that Lucien cared that they died, but that was it. And that's one of the problems when you have to race through a lot of the early stuff in the book. Yes, we got some good character moments, but a lot of it was sort of left open-ended and guessing. For example, now I may have been really dense and just not picking up on this at all, which is very me, so that would be fair, but it took me a very long time to realise that Lucien actually very deeply cared for Brevon and was sleeping with Brevon. That took me a really, really long time to catch on to. And also, I'm not asking for smut-fic, but Lucien at one point claimed that he had bedded many men and many different people, and at no point did I catch that in the text. Again, I'm not asking for like full-on smut, but there was a lot of stuff that Lucien said later on that I had absolutely no reason to believe was true. And for a lot of this, I was actually reading Lucien as almost borderline asexual for a while, so when the hints came up that he was actually doing stuff with people, it got a little bit confusing, and my brain had a little moment of and I did go back and reread some of it. So again, that may have been me just being really dense about that kind of thing, because I can be, but yeah, that was a little confusing, and I feel like they should have sort of picked a lane and steered into it, because Lucien did mention things later on that hadn't been shown in the story, and therefore left me going, heh. I believed what he said, you know, but sometimes, yeah, show don't tell, and I feel like at some points some of the characters were telling us things that we had never been shown, so that was a little frustrating, but not too bad. Overall, the plot ended, well, exactly where we thought it was going to end. It had references to several of the episodes from Critical Role in several moments. I recognised a lot of the scenes, not just from watching Critical Role, but I also remembered it from when I painstakingly was rewatching the episodes of Critical Role Campaign 2 and getting the transcripts up, because I was writing my Nine Eyes Never Shut fanfic, which was essentially my version of this. Well, the second half of this. I didn't write much about Lucien's childhood. I started it from when he came back to life the second time. So if you want to go and read that, you can listen to it here on my page. It's also up on Archive of Our Own. It's called Nine Eyes Never Shut. It is a fully finished fic with all the chapters complete and done, and I will be referencing it quite a bit through the rest of this video, so bear with me when I'm doing that. The reason I'm bringing it up right now is because I wrote that fic, and because I had to go painstakingly back through those episodes and read those moments, I recognised the moments when they came up in this. Particularly the lines that characters were saying, Lucien, Jester, Caleb, that kind of thing. I remembered a lot of those because that was what I put into my fic, and they are actually from the canon, and I remember watching them, and I remember watching them again and again and again, and I remember writing them and including them in my own fic. So that was pretty cool. I was, of course, expecting a book branded with the actual Critical Role logo and thanking the members of Critical Role for their participation in it. I was expecting to have a lot of the canon in here, I just wasn't sure how much to expect. But no, there's a decent chunk. There are lines literally taken straight from the show and shoved in here, and I really enjoyed those bits. I thought they were very well written, particularly from Lucien's point of view, which is something that always completely fascinated me. The last 2 to 3 chapters I particularly enjoyed. Some of them are only a page long. Make of that what you will. But yeah, I would have to say the last 2 or 3 chapters were my favourite parts of the book. It was a place that I know very well, it's a ending of a story that I know very well and means quite a lot to me, and that was quite well written and I enjoyed that. So plot-wise, overall, really happy with it, liked where it went, would have liked a few more bits of information here and there and for some things to be slightly more explicit and detailed, not smutty. But just because, as I said before, we do get Lucien and other characters telling us things that we haven't been shown, so that got a little bit confusing, but in general, plot-wise, I thought it was very, very decent and I enjoyed the plot. And now, if you will forgive me, I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking about my Nine Eyes Never Shut fic. It's relevant, I promise. I was delighted that I wrote quite a lot of the stuff that happens in, presumably, canon now, first. And don't worry, I'm not going to go all freckled hobo on you about this. I'm saying this from a good place. I am happy that I wrote a lot of that in my Nine Eyes Never Shut fic, because if this is canon, which I believe it is, then I was right about quite a lot of things that were happening at the time. Which means that I understood what Matt and Taliesin had been doing, and I understood Lucien's character and Molly's character enough that I got it, and that made me really happy. So when I was reading through the plot of this now canonical story, and I was recognising things that I had already written in my own work, which was, God, years ago, because I started writing mine when they hadn't even finished Critical Role Campaign 2 yet. Anyway, it was so exciting to me! Essentially, the main thing I got right was that there was a small piece of Molly that was still in Lucien and that they were having back and forth banter and a chat. Now, my version of Molly in my fic was a little more pronounced and the conversations they had were a lot deeper and there was a lot more of them. But the moments in which I had them having conversations showed up in this fic. The one that really got me in particular is when Lucien is holding Bo by the throat, and to all intents and purposes, to all the people watching, to the Mighty Nine, it looks like he's trying to kill her. Now, in my fic, in Nine Eyes Never Shut, that moment was actually a little different, and Lucien was not deliberately killing Bo, he was deliberately trying not to kill Bo, and him and Molly were having a conversation in his head at the same time. And lo and behold, that scene happened in this story, almost exactly the same way. Lucien was holding up Bo and not killing her and trying not to actually make her dead, and him and Molly were having a conversation in his head at the same time. That was pretty damn cool. So again, taking this as canon, it was delightful to know that I guessed a lot of things, at least partially right, about what was going on in the events of Critical Role Campaign 2. So, major props to me, I guess, and go read my fic. If you haven't read this, go read my fic anyway. If you had read this, go read my fic and compare and contrast. Alright, that's enough about the plot and about my fic. I promise not to talk about it again for the rest of this video. Maybe. Now let's move on to the characters. I am mostly talking about Lucien, Cree, and, spoiler alert, Mollymauk. Because while the other characters were interesting, and we did get to know them a little bit, they didn't have as much screen time, for lack of a better word, as the main three. I will say that all of the background characters did feel fairly fleshed out. You got to know them relatively well, you could tell the differences between each of their personalities, and they were fairly enjoyable. So yeah, they were pretty good, but we're going to mainly be talking about Lucien, Cree, and Mollymauk. So here we go. I'm going to start off by talking about Cree, because I've got a lot more to say about Lucien and Mollymauk. Cree I enjoy as a character, and Cree in this read very similarly to the Cree we got in Critical Role Campaign 2, and also, just to bring it up one more time, she felt very similar to the Cree that I wrote in my Nine Eyes Never Shut fic, but again, I think that's a good thing. It was good that I felt like I understood this character from a point of view of writing her, and from a point of view of watching Matt Mercer play her, because again, I feel like this book and me got the original source material, we were writing from a place of understanding, it felt very connected. I enjoyed Cree, I enjoyed seeing her grow up and understanding where she was coming from. The glint was a bit interesting, not my favourite plot point, but I saw it, it was fine, it was okay. I feel like it could have had a bigger payoff later, but it was fine. It was okay, it was a part of her character and there it was. But yeah, Cree I really enjoyed, I thought she was very good, and I definitely could hear the voice that Matt Mercer gave her. That definitely worked. Everything seemed to fit with Cree in here. Let's move on to Lucien, the Nonagon. I still can't quite get used to Lucien having a surname, because he's always just been Lucien or the Nonagon. But yes, in this he has his surname, he is Lucien Tavel, and I like it, it works. I like that it begins with a T, that makes sense. And as a character, I very much enjoyed the Lucien that we met through this story. I wasn't particularly keen on very early Lucien, he did read quite a lot like a boy from a Dickens novel at points, but he got over it as he grew up and turned into an angsty teenager, and I very much enjoyed that. So seeing him grow up, Although we didn't hear as much about him as I would have wanted to, like I said in the plot points, there were some things that we should have been shown, not told, and we just weren't shown. He just told us. I also enjoyed his relationships with the other characters, particularly characters who were authority figures that he did not enjoy. His relationships with his peers and Cree in particular, they were very well written. I enjoyed those, particularly seeing how they slowly dissolved from being friendships into, well, master and subject, and then eventually, well, if you die, it'll be fine because I'll bring you back later, even though sadly he didn't get to do that. But that was a very sweet moment when he was thinking that he will right the world and he'll bring them back when he does so. That was very sweet and I enjoyed those moments. One of the things I particularly enjoyed about this characterization of Lucien was how subtly he changed from a slightly petulant, scavenging child into a slightly petulant and aggravated teenager, and then into a powerful and commanding adult. The shifts happen just so naturally over time, taking in all the different plot beats and the things that were happening, his relationships with the people around him and everything like that. I really enjoyed seeing him rise into being the Nonagon, and you really understood why he did as well. So that was particularly well done. I very much enjoyed that. So Lucien as a character, it's me in my fluffy hood, it's me, Lucien. Lucien in this, he definitely felt, particularly the grown-up Lucien, he felt a lot like the Lucien that we met, played by Matt Mercer. I feel like there was a lot of that in here. I could hear Matt Mercer's voice a lot of the time. Not every time, some of the lines were a little interesting, but most of the time I very much enjoyed the Lucien presented in this story. I liked getting to know him, I was definitely along for the ride, and I was very sad to see him go at the end, even though we all knew it was going to happen, but still. Poor Lucy. Alright, let's talk about Mollymauk Tea Leaf then. I feel like I should be in Mollymauk cosplay when I'm discussing the character of Mollymauk Tea Leaf, so here we are, I'm back again. Without going too much into my own personal history, although I have done in other videos, but please bear in mind I am going to be remaking all of my personal history on Mollymauk videos because I was femme presenting in some of them and that makes me feel icky. Basically, yeah, I connected to Molly on many very deep emotional levels. He helped me through some particularly difficult times, and therefore I feel like I have an understanding of at least my view of that character. That being said, I was very aware before I started reading this book that Molly may be in it, mentioned in it. I didn't know how much, but I also knew that I would have to set aside my own personal version of Molly because this may be completely different. I wasn't sure how much Taliesin had to do with it. I know he didn't write it, therefore it's never going to be the true Molly because it's not being written and played by Taliesin. And so I did have to put the book down a few times just to remind myself this is a new person, you know, writing about Molly. Again, that being said, in all honesty, the portrayal of Mollymauk that we got in this, and there wasn't much, I earmarked a few pages where Molly is speaking in this book, and it's really not very much, and it's mostly towards the end few chapters. The version of Molly that we got in the Nine Eyes of Lucien, I wasn't particularly impressed by. I couldn't easily pinpoint what it is that just made me disconnect from the Mollymauk a little bit. I tried. I went back through it, I talked it over with a few people I knew, I tried very hard to get to the root of what it was that was jarring me, because again, I really did try to put aside my own personal feelings about Molly and just read it as Molly. I tried to imagine Taliesin saying the lines, and that didn't really help. After I'd read the Molly sections of this at least another 5 times to really try and get to the root of what it was that was niggling at me, and discussing it with many of my friends and stuff, I discovered that one of the things that just made me disconnect from the Molly in this book was the way he spoke felt very modern, very 21st century. Now, I know that when they're playing Critical Role, they do throw in a lot of 21st century mannerisms and in-jokes and things like that, so that wasn't it. That would have been fine, because that's the Critical Role cast that we know. This, it just... I'll see if I can find an example so that you can see what I mean. I'll try and do my terrible Irish accent, hang on. Can't believe I'm agreeing with an ancient nutty professor in our head, but stranger things, eh? What does it feel like to be back with the old squad? Anything coming up? I think it might have been the word squad. That to me felt more Ashton than Molly. I feel like I'm getting really picky. Little things like that just made me go, you know, and again, maybe I'm being too picky and it's just not the Molly I have in my head. I feel like it's just not quite there. It's nearly there, but it's not quite. It's almost like a first draft of Molly's lines, if that makes sense. Like the first draft of a play script. Maybe that's what it was supposed to sound like, because this is a lost Molly. It's the Molly piece that's in Lucien. You know, it's not the fully fleshed out Molly. Maybe that's what they were going for. I'm not sure. But that was the feeling that I got about Molly. Lucien, very well rounded as a character, but the Molly in this, he just didn't hit me as Molly. He hit me as a voice in Lucien's head that he was calling Molly. This bit. Hear me out. I'm sorry, Lucien, but I can't let you do this. I can't let you unmake and destroy this world Yasha walks through. She's suffered enough without you and your buddies turning everything upside down. I'll do whatever I can to stop you. The sentiment is very Molly, like protecting the world with Yasha in it, and his friends, but you know, primarily Yasha at all costs. Yes, I 100% get that. The sentiment is right. The way it's being expressed just needs some work, I say to a fully published book. I don't know, it doesn't feel... I feel like having got Lucien so good, the Molly was a letdown. And then you've got lines like this one, which again, it feels like a first draft. Listen, wash the blood of my friends off your hands, you degenerate freak. I feel like the slightly more Molly version of that would be, wash my friend's blood off your hands, you degenerate fuck. You know what I mean? But again, maybe that's just me. It may well just be me. Killing for a dream. Too dense to see the irony? You know, stuff like that's good. I like that. And then there's lines like this one. Bit anticlimactic, don't you think? Womp wah. I mean, you could kill them with those thought bombs, blah, 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 blah. I just... Womp wah. Number one, seeing that written down is friggin' weird. And number two, I feel like that could have been Molly-ified better than that. I know, I am aware, I am being ridiculously picky, but this is a character who is very, very important to me, and that is very important to the plot of this book. And even when I'm imagining Taliesin saying it, it's just not hitting me right. Wah, wah. All that being said, I do enjoy the line, like the refrains of a song you learn again each day. That line makes me very happy. I really enjoy that line. It makes me very happy. It makes me feel very... I definitely relate and understand that line. 100%. So yeah, that line is a very good line. I enjoy that one. One of the bits that Molly said that I did enjoy was one of the bits that made me think of my own fic. Again, not in a, oh my god, way, just in a, I'm glad that I understood this story and these characters enough that I guessed some of these things. And there's like the back chat between Molly and Lucien, and then there's Lucien saying, still convinced I can change. And then Molly going, no, but you keep letting the Mighty Nine get away. You haven't killed my friends yet. And it's just the back chat. Just the banter between those two. I really like that I guessed that right and that was continuing. That makes me happy. So, to sum up very quickly then, why I felt a little bit let down by the portrayal of Mollymauk Tealeaf in this book, it was because even imagining Taliesin Jaffe saying the lines, not all of them felt very Molly, and also some of the lines just felt a little, the only word I can really think of is modern, in terms of how Taliesin was portraying him, how Mollymauk acted in the world, that kind of thing. Some of them just didn't quite fit. What? It made me laugh, but not for the right reasons. Okay, moving on to the next bit. What? I would just like to say that I appreciate that reading literature or listening to audiobooks, you know, however you enjoy literature and stories, it is fairly subjective, really, because no two people are necessarily going to enjoy the same type of media, or the same style of writing, the same comedic timing, the same type of characterization, the same typeface, the same length of book, you know, all of that. So I would like to make it very, very clear that this particular section about the writing style of Madeleine Roux is completely of my own opinion, just from me, and I am not saying that any of you will or should feel the same way that I do. I am merely giving you my opinion, coming from the very, very picky reader that I am. That being said, let's discuss the writing style of Madeleine Roux's The Nine Eyes of Lucien. It was not my favourite. Yeah, this was not my favourite kind of writing style. I did know that going in, though. Going in, I knew that my favourite type of writing style is very particular, and I've only found about 3 authors who have ever really satisfied me completely, and that's J.M. Barrie Lewis Carroll and J.R.R. Tolkien. I like very descriptive, lyrical, poetic, luscious fantasy. That's what I like. And I knew going in that this was not going to be that. I am delighted that Madeleine Roux is the New York Times best-selling author. I am sure the Asylum series is great. It's just definitely not for me. This is not my style of writing. And to be honest, it was just my love of the character Lucien that kept me reading this. If this book had been about anyone else, open bracket, except for Lucien, Mollymauk, Kingsley, or maybe Vax or Dan, close bracket. If this book had been about anyone else's backstory, I would not have finished it. However, as I acknowledged before, I am aware that I am ridiculously picky, and I knew this was never going to be my favourite writing style. But I was still expecting a little bit more, considering it is about the fascinating character Lucien, and it has lots of Mollymauk in there as well. I feel like those characters deserved slightly more than what they were given here. Again, it's not terrible, it is just not for me. Remember when I was talking about the characterization of Molly in this, and how I felt that a lot of his lines were just the first draft version? Well, there were some parts of this book, not the whole thing, a lot of it was very, very good, but there were some parts of this, particularly in the descriptions of things, that I just felt could have done with another quick go over. There were a few moments where the same word was repeated quite a few times in the same sentence, and there were moments where we were told the same piece of information over again. I did go back and I reread this whole story again, looking specifically at the writing style and trying to put into words what it was that was irking me about it a little bit and just making me not quite as engaged as I wanted to be, particularly considering that Lucien is such a fascinating character. And the best way I can describe it is this. This book, it reads a little bit like someone wrote one chapter, left it in a drawer, and then started writing the next chapter without consulting the previous chapter that was still in the drawer and having let it sit there for several weeks. Does that make sense? It didn't feel like a continuous story was being told. It felt like a bits and pieces stop-starty story, which actually I discovered didn't have anything to do with the time skips. Each time we skipped in time, it made sense that we did. The plot we were talking about had run its course, there was no more need to stay there, so we moved on to the next bit. That was fine. It just didn't feel like a continuous thread of writing. It felt, as I said, like someone had written a chunk of it, put it down, and then come back to it a long time later and not read what they'd previously written and then carried it on. It just felt a little disjointed for me. And again, I know that writing styles are kind of my Achilles heel because no one's ever really going to satisfy me very well, but even ignoring the fact that the style was just not for me, the way it was written overall and presented as a story, I just feel like it could have had one more draft and it would have been there, particularly with Molly's lines and with how the story felt connected from scene to scene to scene. So I know I'm picky. I know I'm picky. I know I'm impossible to please. I have put down many books after only reading the first page, not even the first chapter. But with this book, I do have to say that considering what a fantastic character it's all about, I was a little disappointed by the writing style and the way the book was presented. Alright, let's do some overall thoughts, shall we? Overall then, the plot of the Nine Eyes of Lucien, I very much enjoyed. We knew where it was going to end, but I enjoyed finding out the little bits of Lucien's backstory that we didn't already know. The characters, Cree, I enjoyed. The background characters we got to meet, I enjoyed. Vesterogna was fun. Lucien, as a character, very well presented. Definitely felt like he was the canon Lucien. And Mollymauk, as I said, I was a little let down by Molly, but again, I just don't think anyone's ever going to really do him justice, are they? So it was a very, very massive pair of shoes to step into. Of course you're not going to fill them. But overall, character-wise, loved Lucien and he's the main important one, so that was fine. The writing style let it down a little bit for me, ignoring the fact that I am ridiculously picky anyway and so therefore was probably going to be about it to begin with. I did struggle to read bits at times and it was simply my love of Lucien that was dragging me through each page to page to page. But it was not terrible. It was just not for me. So overall, I would rate The Nine Eyes of Lucien by Madeleine Roux a solid 7 out of 10. It's definitely worth a read if you're interested in Critical Role lore, or if you love the character of Lucien as much as I do, or if you enjoyed Molly as much as I do, or Kingsley as much as I do as well. But if you're as picky about writing styles as me, just be prepared when you go in. It's not going to live up to your massively high standards. But as a novel, it is very enjoyable and Lucien is presented very, very well. And let's face it, folks, any excuse to see more of this is absolutely worth it. And of course the ending would not have been perfect if it had not included Kingsley Tealeaf, the ruffian pirate. I am very glad he was mentioned in the last page. So, thank you very much for joining me on today's episode of Monday Madness, you wonderful chaotic jelly spoons, you. If you'd like to support me in my crazy journeys, then there are links to my Ko-fi and my Patreon down below and up in the thingamydingmies. I have got my commissions open, and I am considering making Christmassy bandanas for dogs and people. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. I will be chucking those on my Ko-fi and potentially an Etsy shop. I haven't quite decided yet. Enjoy the rest of your week, and let me know, have you been reading any interesting books recently? Have you watched The Mighty Nine Season 2? What did you think? Have you read this book? What did you think? Who are your favourite characters? What did you enjoy? What didn't you enjoy? If you horribly disagree with me, yep, fair play. Tell me why. Let me know down in the comments below. Have a wonderful week, my wonderful jelly spoons. Goodbye. Yeah, the paint's all come off this hand. Sorry. What?